to start with basketball.
Okay.
I want to
Yeah,
hear your
let's talk hoops.
background.
Yeah, so I played all sports growing up, and I was the only one in my family to play basketball. And we moved from the East Coast to the Bay Area of California when I was 11, and I immediately fell in love with Stanford basketball. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's where I want to go. And so I went to camp as a camper, and I went to the games, and then I applied out of high school. And being the only one in my family who played, I think I started playing club basketball reflectively a little later than one should start playing in order to pursue the path of a college scholarship. And so out of high school, I didn't have any scholarship offers. And I thought, well, if I can get admitted to Stanford, then I can try out as a walk on. And so that became my
Right.
goal. And didn't get admitted out of high school my senior year. So I went to the local junior college. I played basketball there. I applied a second time after my freshman year, got a second rejection letter, and I taped both of them on the ceiling above my bed as motivation to kind of keep going and get better. And the second rejection letter came with a nice note from admissions that said, Elizabeth, we realize you've applied twice now, and we had a large sophomore transfer class, and we wish you the best if you decide to apply again, which was very sweet. And then by the time I finished my sophomore year, I had to decide, did I want to try for Stanford a third time, or did I want to take one of the scholarship offers that was on the table? So I decided to accept an offer to UMBC out in Maryland. So I realized the dream of, having school paid for through basketball, and it happened to be at the Division I level. And I was there for a year, and in that year realized that I really wanted much more of an academic experience than I was able to get. And so I ended up transferring to Division III Claremont McKenna. And I spent
Okay.
2 years there playing basketball, getting a great education. I'm so glad, as challenging as it was to transfer and to leave my teammates, and I'd been elected captain of the team. So it was really hard to feel like I was quitting at something, but it was such a great move for my education. And I really value my time at Claremont. So I finished, I finished in '06 at Claremont. And while I was in college in the summers, I would coach now at Tara Vanderveer's basketball camps at Stanford. So I was a camper and now I'm a camp coach. And it was the summer between my junior and senior year when Tara asked, when you graduate from college, would you like to come back and intern with our women's basketball program? So I was like, yes, absolutely. So at 11, I fell in love with Stanford. At 22, now I'm a part of the program. And I got to do everything. And I think I learned so much during that year, in part because Tara was so generous with her time. Everything from, sitting in the meetings and planning practice to Windexing backboards, because, the games management set up the court, and then Tara would inevitably see one little spot and, hey, Bets, can you grab the ladder and just, get up there and shine it up a little bit. So I spent the year with Stanford, and Tara's youngest sister, Heidi Vanderveer, at the time was coaching in the WNBA with the Seattle Storm, and, opposite seasons, college and WNBA. And so by the time the Stanford season finished, I had interviewed with the Storm and got hired on as part of their staff, and got to spend a year with players like Sue Bird and Lauren Jackson. And I was 23 at the time now, and traveling the country with a great WNBA team. So it was just such a fun time. And the season ended, and the University of Washington was taking on an entirely new basketball staff. So I got on with them as the video coordinator, spent a year at Washington, and then Heidi decided to get out of the pros and back into coaching college. So she became the head coach at Occidental College, Division III, which was in my old conference from when I played at Claremont McKenna. And she asked me to come be her assistant coach. So I was now coaching against my old college coach, which was really fun. Jody Burton, great basketball coach. So we had a lot of fun competitions. She won't, she'd probably rather I keep this in, but we did beat Claremont every year. So it was always kind of a challenge. It's like, who do I root for? Like, I want our team to win, but I really, this is my old coach. So that became part of my journey. And Heidi and I spent 4 years at Occidental. And then Heidi took the head coaching job at UC San Diego. And I went with her, and I spent 3 years there before hanging up my whistle. So when we were still at Occidental College is when we were on a road trip to the Bay Area. our athletic director had come with us. And I remember getting a voicemail on my phone after one of our games. And it was our AD, Jamie, and she said, "Hey, Bets, if Heidi says it's okay, can you take one of the minivans, drive up to San Francisco," which was, 20, 25 minute drive from where we were staying. She said, "There's someone I want you to meet." So I drive up to the city and it's this rainy, dark San Francisco night. And I pull up to this whiskey bar, and in the back is our athletic director sitting at a table with another woman. And I walk up to the table and Jamie says, "Betsy, this is Sue. Sue coaches leaders. I think you have a lot to talk about." And that was the exact moment when I first learned that coaching was something that existed outside of sport. And as soon as I did, I was like, this is the thing I feel most called to do. The running joke with Heidi was always that I liked basketball, but I loved people. And for me, coaching basketball was really what I felt like was a meaningful way to help individuals experience that aha moment and do something they'd yet to do and become something they'd yet to become. And what I realized over time was what I was really looking for is, can I give that to people, not just in sport, but in their life? And so I started a year of study while I was coaching at Oxy, and I earned my integral coaching certificate, which is a fancy word for saying I take a whole person perspective to individual work, and began coaching coaches, which at the time was not a thing. We have mentors as coaches, we have staff members, we have, significant others, but there really wasn't someone that, had no skin in the game, wasn't necessarily part of the politics around athletics, but was really there for the development of the coaches and their individual support. And the whole premise was, I thought, if I can help coaches be at their best, then they can give their best to the student athletes in their program. And that was the space I wanted to play in. And there was no plan. It was simply starting where I was, and I started coaching a few, individuals within our department. And then, like you mentioned, referrals, kind of keep going. And so I started doing that in 2011. And by 2015, when I was now at UC San Diego, it had reached a point where I didn't feel like I was giving my best to either. We had such a successful team and program. I love coaching with Heidi. I would have stayed coaching with Heidi until the end of time. But there was also this pull to make a bigger impact in a way that meant I would have to leave the 17 student athletes that we had and the super cute studio apartment that I lived in 3 blocks from Windansea Beach in La Jolla, and this great program. And it's like, okay, so I made that decision. Again, not having a plan, not having a business background. And I think from the day I resigned, I barely slept for 2 weeks. And I'm a really good sleeper because it was like, oh shit, like, what did you just do? That was a really dumb idea, Betsy. There was no path where I could follow and say, well, if I do what this person did, then I'll get where this person got. And so that began really my entrepreneurial journey in 2015. And fast forward now to 2021, and I have the opportunity to work with so many different teams and athletic departments and individual coaches and organizations, whether it's as a keynote speaker or, as someone that gets to be with a team for a whole season. So do I miss coaching? Absolutely. Am I still coaching? Yes, it looks different than it used to. And I'm so fortunate and just feel privileged to be invited into people's lives in a way that's very intimate and also has such raw capacity for impact and to make positive change.
That is such a cool story.
Thank
Um,
you.
is actually, I knew when you had quit coaching at UCSD, but I know a lot of times old coaches will come back with and help with the elite camps and stuff. And my daughter always, when she's at a camp, will get a picture with the coach. So before we got on the call, I was actually looking through all her pictures to see if she had any pictures with you. But she had some with Heidi, but
Okay.
not
Yeah,
with
that's
you.
funny.
Yeah, it's funny too. One of the drills, our Mikan drill, we have a one that we go through all the time. Was I watched Heidi go through it, and I was like, that is such a great drill. And
Yeah.
so,
Oh man. There's a benefit, I'll say, to being Stanford trained. And when I say Stanford trained, I mean like going to camp and doing the drills there and then coaching at camp and learning all these different drills to coach and then being part of the program when I graduated and watching practice on a daily level. So I think Heidi and I working together, because Heidi and Tara are so close, there was a lot of synergy, and it was really easy for us to be on the same page with, kind of what we were doing, the way that we then trained our student athletes. So I'm very much Stanford trained, but the mic and drill, I mean, there's some fantastic ball handling drills. I still remember as a camper, the rhythm dribble that we did, that when you do this in a certain way, whether it's, body wraps or single leg wraps or whatever, with slaps and bounces, like it makes this rhythm, this beat to it. Yeah, so cool.
Yeah, as actually as I was going through that, we went to a lot of camps that summer, and so I had a lot of pictures and stuff. But all of the stuff at Heidi's camp was all video, and I think that was mostly for me, so I could get back to my practice and
Yeah,
say
right.
I'm doing that.
Right. Heidi always says, why reinvent the wheel when you can steal? It's like great stuff
Yeah,
is great stuff is great stuff. And what adds value for our student athletes? That's always the question that we keep kind of front of mind.
yeah. So no, I'm excited to get your thoughts on some of these things. With the fact that, like I'd said earlier, there's so much crossover between athletics and entrepreneurship, business, anything in life. In fact, I was putting a course together a while ago, and at one point I thought maybe I should stop using so many sports analogies and sports stories. And then I thought, no, that's perfect.
Yep. It's perfect. Yeah.
So one of the things I'd like to hear your thoughts on is, and especially because you've got that experience from being an athlete yourself, but then also dealing with the athletes, how to create a powerful mindset that know that you can achieve that next level of success. What are your thoughts on that?
Two things come up for me, Jeff, when you ask that question. And the first is, what I'll say is the biggest issue that I find, regardless of who I'm coaching now in a professional space. And this question often comes up in a panel setting. They'll say with the coaches that you've worked with the student athletes you've worked with, what's the biggest issue, regardless of gender or sport, that you come across? And the biggest issue that I think relates to mindset here is, at some point, people that are experiencing distress have forgotten that they have a choice. And so a lot of the work for me when it comes to mindset is reacclimating people to the choices available to them, and then help them to see from a different perspective, or open up a new world of possibilities based on choices that they were no longer aware they had. So how can you help an individual really take an active role in their own life, let alone their own development, let alone their mindset? So the second
Yeah.
part was, recently I found myself having conversations with student athletes, especially ones that are very competitive, that have that ability to be great by whatever standards are set within their sport, that we hear young people continually talking about being the best. And I love that goal. The challenge for me from a mindset perspective with that goal is that the best is continually changing. And it's so broad. You might have one individual in your sport that you're looking to emulate or surpass. Typically, the best, as we move forward, each day we train, others are training, others are improving. So instead of focusing outwardly on being the best, can we instead shift our mindset and focus on being my best? Because I know if I reach my full capacity, if I'm focused on what I can control to be my best today and the next day and the day after, I am much more likely to get close to competing with the best. So that for me is an important shift to help individuals make, is, how do we, instead of going outward into this large space of the bestdom, how do I get back into focusing on becoming my best? And then when I feel like I've arrived in that space, now I can start going back out and comparing to others.
Thank you. I love that. Now, I know a lot of your coaching is around communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I know on the basketball court, that's a huge thing to have.
A
So
quiet gym's a losing gym, right?
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Talk to me about championship communication.
Championship communication for me, and the framework that I like to use when addressing communication in a championship context, is, if you look at high performing teams, whether those are sports teams or corporate teams or groups of individuals, high performers, there's a buzzword most often associated with those kinds of teams, and that word is chemistry. Chemistry is formed through connection, and for me, at the heart of connection is communication. So when we start to become intentional about the way we communicate with each other, we stand a much better chance of forming the connection that we know we need in order to achieve our greatest success. So for me, yes, there's so many different things that we know if we're going to win a championship, we need to focus on all these different elements. For me, the vein I've choose to focus in is on communication. And championship communication at a base level means becoming more aware of how we're communicating and the different ways that we're communicating and why we're communicating. Can we bring greater intention to our communication? So often communication is something that we all do, and we only pause to be intentional about it when we have something important to say, whether we're writing an important email, or we're about to give a talk to our team, whether it's pregame, or to tell them, in a COVID landscape that, hey, we thought we had a season, and now we don't. So there's moments when we bring that intention to our communication. If we can increase that frequency, I think we all stand to be better communicators. And that's the other thing, is that it's possible. Communication is a skill. It's not something that, is a natural talent or a gift, although many people think, wow, Betsy, you're so well spoken, or you have the gift of language. Sure, that may be true. And I like to say I've had the opportunity to practice so often over my life, much of which happened during my coaching days. You think about whether you're talking to your team or you're in a camp environment and now you're speaking to 400, 500, young campers. It's like there's so many different arenas that coaching allows us to practice our oratory skills, our language skills, our communication skills. But communication is a skill that anybody can practice at any time. And that's what I love about communication.
What are your thoughts about? I mean, of course, there needs to be great communication throughout, but what are your thoughts, using basketball as an example again, communication from within, say, the players on the floor?
Hmm.
What are your thoughts around the importance of that?
I mean, for me, it's crucial, right? As coaches, we can't play for them.
Hmm.
And so using language as a tool to support and help direct the outcome that we're looking for. But player communication, and this is the interesting part, Jeff, is I think oftentimes when it comes to communication, we think about like this is the right way or the wrong way, or this is the best way, and anything other than that isn't so good. I've seen really successful teams communicate in a variety of ways. And I think about scaling it back to a family. So my family, there's 5 of us in our family. The Buttericks are not a loud people. The joke is that my parents should have been golf announcers because, they're very quiet people. I wasn't a yeller as a coach. I did sometimes when appropriate, and I will guarantee that every student athlete that was part of that team at that time can tell you to this day exactly what I said because it was warranted, right? So again, what's the intention behind our choice as we're communicating? But coming back to the family, I had a friend who I remember going over to her house, and her family yelled and screamed all the time. And younger me was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they do this. Like, this is terrible. This is not productive communication. What I learned in spending time with her family is that this is how they've chosen to communicate with each other. So for them, it is productive. It's my judgment of it being destructive that's my barrier, that's getting in the way of my understanding of what communication looks like. Same thing in teams. So it's, not that we're not going to disagree or we're only going to use positive statements. It's how are we agreeing to disagree? What's the language of our program? And I think that's one of the most enjoyable aspects of my job is when I go to observe a program and I'll watch their practices, their training sessions, their team meetings, their staff meetings. What is the language that they use to communicate with each other? And then how can I help improve upon the foundation they already set? What are the small shifts in language? Rarely is it big monumental things. It's these small shifts, these small changes that allow us to become more effective with our communication. Knowing that in sport, in basketball, if you're running up and down the court, we don't have time to stop and have a long dialogue and explanation and discourse about, the last play. It's like, how do we succinctly communicate, not just in words, but in our body language, with our eye contact, that which needs to be communicated in order to address what needs to happen now. That's the challenge of communication in sport.
And if I'm thinking of the right time, and if I am, I'm sure you had an impact on this. Was I think at Heidi's camp, one of her big things was you had to have a certain amount of touches,
Mm,
as in high fives and stuff
right.
like that. And I think
Yeah.
that's another key is, just the fact that players are focused on doing that. I think that opens up the ability to communicate better because of that part
Yeah.
of it.
That relationship building. And I'll say one thing I got from Heidi, and this is really where I think we had such strong alignment, and this is what led to us being as successful as we were. I mean, we won 4 championships in 4 years at Occidental, and then 2 and 3 years that we were together at UC San Diego. And it was because we rarely talked with our teams about winning. Our goal as coaches every year was to make sure that each of our student athletes felt seen, valued, and appreciated, regardless of their skill level. When you do that, you have a team of happy people, and happy people want to give you their best. When you have a lot of people giving you their best, well, you tend to win a lot of games. But can we make that our focus instead of, that performance outcome? Can we invest in the people and trust that when we do so, the process and the outcome will take care of it themselves?
Thank you. um I know one of the other things I was reading, and I like the idea, is talk about reframing.
Mm, I love reframing. I think that this is, I mean, it's kind of a game. Like, um, perspective is a big part of my work and part of my life is, coming back to that element of choice. How am I seeing things right now? And if I were to change my perspective, and there's an exercise I do, the takeaway of which is when we change our perspective, we can have a different experience. So that lends itself, when I talk about reframing, is how can we reframe what's happening now, or maybe our natural reaction to something, and put things in a different framework that would allow us to take a different perspective, which would allow us to experience something different or new. Reframing the positive for me is something that, when I was doing research, and I hear this in coaching all the time, coaches say, don't do this, like, don't stop running, or, don't quit on the play. It's like when we tell people what we want them to do instead of what we don't want them to do, we're much more likely to get the outcome that we're looking for. And going back to Heidi, I love her. Heidi's family to me. And I remember it was our first year at Oxy, and we're huddled up. And so we've got really smart student athletes, right? And because of that, Heidi explained a drill we were going to do. And she then said something like, and it doesn't mean that you can't do this. And I don't want you to do this. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to do this. And she said so many don'ts and doesn't, that by the end, the student athletes were looking at me like, what does she mean? Like, what is the, like, I've lost track of what our whole goal or purpose is. And that was really, for me, an experience that became a catalyst for thinking about how are we using language in a sports context, combining it with the fact that we don't understand negatives. So subconsciously, we don't process negatives in the same way that we understand them when we speak them. So I can say to you, Jeff, Jeff, don't do that. Right. And you're like, oh, Betsy doesn't want me to do that. When we hear don't, and this shows up a basketball example, I kick myself because I think about how many times I did this. End of game situation. Let's say there's 2 seconds left. We're up by one. The other team has to inbound the ball, go full court, and it's timeout. And so I tell my team, okay, the only thing we can't do is foul. Whatever you do, don't foul. And everyone's sitting there going, yeah, okay, don't foul, don't foul. And then we go out, and the ball's inbounded, and within a second, it's like, tweet, foul. And everyone's like, oh, we just talked about it. The only thing you couldn't do was foul. They understood, and yet subconsciously, a negative acts as a little blip on the radar. We don't process it the same way. And so we actually pay more attention to the word that comes next. So every time I say don't foul, what it's saying internally is foul, foul, foul. And then we see that translate into language. And there's so many different, or into experience. There's so many different examples. I love golf. I'm a terrible golfer, but I love it. And I think about the number of times I'm like 4 inches away from the hole, and I'm like, okay, whatever you do, just don't leave it short. And then it's like, Murk. So can we be intentional with our language? Can we rephrase in the positive, and doing so, reframe the situation that we're in and allow us to have a different experience? So let's use language intentionally. And this becomes a game that teams play. I'll do an exercise with them where I'll say, okay, I want you to write down all the negative phrases that you hear your coaches say, specifically ones that start with don't or stop. And they get so excited and they were like, oh, coach says this, coach says this. And even 30 seconds, I'll say, okay, stop. Now I want you to rephrase each of those in the positive. And so it's a little challenging, but they do it. And then it becomes a game that they play within their program. Anytime somebody says don't, someone yells out rephrase, and then they're challenged to rephrase and say what they really want instead of what they don't want. And when we do that, the long-term effect is, we know from research on teams of all kind, again, athletic teams or corporate teams, that positive environments outperform negative environments. They get better results. Positive leaders perform better under pressure. So can we use language to start to create a more positive environment? Absolutely. And those that do see greater success.
That is great. The don't, I love that. It reminded me of a story when my oldest daughter was a little younger. She was playing Little League, and we were in one community. My brother was coaching a team in another community, and we were playing each other. And her cousin was the pitcher. And
Okay.
my brother said all week, all I said is, just don't hit to you. Don't hit to you. So second pitch, he nails her.
Absolutely. Yeah, there you go. That's a perfect example. Perfect example. And I'm thinking about, even tossing things in the house, right? It's like, okay, just don't hit the lamp, right? And it's like, just like, what, our brain is so smart. And when we tell it things, it focuses on those things. The thing we don't want to do is what it's going to focus on, because that's where our focus is. So you talk about mental training. It's like, yeah, reframing in the positive, rephrasing in the positive. So crucial if we hope to experience success. If not,
Yeah.
you say whatever you want.
Yeah, right. No, thank you. Now, I love this topic because I think it's so vital and so many people avoid it. Confrontation and having difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm. They
What do
do.
you?
I was one of those people. I mean, when I started coaching at 23, I was absolutely someone who said, I don't like conflict. I don't like confrontation. And yet now, as a coach, I had to have these conversations, difficult conversations with student athletes. And for me, talk about reframing, I needed to change how I think about these things so that I could stand to have a different experience with them. So I decided to, instead of calling them conflict or confrontation, I decided to call them caring conversations, which you can argue sounds super soft, but for me, it meant I cared enough about that individual or the goals of our program to have what would otherwise be a more difficult conversation. And here's the thing with difficult conversations, most of us fear them or avoid them because of one of two reasons. One, we've never been taught how to do them well, or two, and sometimes it's a combination of both, we've had negative experiences that cause us to avoid them. Like, I don't want to revisit that. I was unprepared for that. It didn't go well. That's not something I want any part of anytime soon. Totally natural reactions. So the challenge becomes, okay, how can we start to acquire the skills and then practice those skills that allow us to have difficult conversations in a way that builds trust and relationship? And when we do, I mean, those kinds of conversations, while they're things that most of us fear, can be such wonderful, powerful, beautiful, connective conversations. We think about them as divisive. When done well, some of the best conversations I've had or witnessed or mediated are really challenging conversations, but that's where the growth lies. That's where the opportunity for connection is so poignant in those spaces that are challenging, because it matters. Typically emotions are high, and oftentimes there's tears. For me, anytime someone cries and they say I'm sorry, I'm like, no, I'm grateful. Like, you care so much about this thing that it's literally leaking out of you. There's nothing, in my opinion, to be ashamed about there. It means you care. So let's stay here. Let's talk about the things that really matter.
I love that. Thank you. Um, Success is a choice.
It
What are your
is.
thoughts on that?
Well, you already know that I like success better than winning, because here's the thing is, we can do everything within our control to give ourselves the greatest opportunity to win. And there's still going to be times where we come up against factors outside of our control that don't allow us to get that victory. So that's why I prefer to talk about success. I believe success is a choice. And in that, I'll say that the degree to which we succeed depends upon the choices we make when we fail. And for me, failure is not fatal or final. Failure is a great opportunity to say, oh, that didn't work. Let's try again. And to almost go back to being childlike, where we're not focused on outcome, we're focused on, this is a game. This is something to figure out. This is something that didn't work, and without attachment to ego or what it means for me as a person and its reflection on, my value as a human being, that it's something that occurred, and now I have an opportunity to try again. So when you say success is a choice, for me that shows up in my life as, what opportunities am I giving myself? Am I gifting myself to try something that I haven't tried before, to see what happens? I mean, that's the creative space, that's the playful space, that's the compelling invitation, is where do I stand to do something that I haven't done before? And in doing so, perhaps create a result that I've yet to experience. And yeah, if we can commit to that, is it scary? Sure. Absolutely. I have a card. It's one of those quote cards that's been with me, I don't know, 12 years or so. And it says, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And I remember there was a distinct time in my life where that fear prevented me from doing things. And then there was also a time in my life, much when I hung up my whistle, where I'm like, well, we are here. So it is scary. What do you want to do now? Because inaction is no longer an option. And then to have that lived experience again and again of the things that I do really want, that making that impact, that making that connection, that doing work that matters, is absolutely on the other side of fear. And fear for me has become more of a friend, more of a, kind of sit on the shoulder and say, hey, pay attention here. If there's something that I'm afraid of doing, that's become a great indication for me of, yeah, I need to take a look at that. And maybe we can try something here. It doesn't have to be big to start, but where can I dabble? Where can I wade into the shallow end of this fear? And in doing so, find out, the water's not that cold. We can swim here.
I think that's just such a great example of the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And yeah.
And I understand the
great.
reasons people have a fixed mindset. And then my challenge is always like, it's not helping you. Like, these things that you say that you want can only happen if you let go of that fixed mindset. So you can choose to keep it. Again, choice. You can choose to keep it if you want. I want you to know that that choice is going to prevent you from having the things you say you really want and that you're really committed to. So again, you get to choose here. What's going to be most beneficial? Can we get out of our own way?
Right. And, I think a lot of the problem with people with a fixed mindset isn't that they're purposely doing things wrong.
Nope.
It's the ignorance of not knowing any different. Before I really began studying these things, once I started studying these things, I reflected on my own life and was like, wow, I was doing that wrong. And I've even sat down with my daughter just recently as I was teaching her some of the things, and we reflected back on her growing up and her basketball career. And, I pointed out things, we were doing these things which were great. You had a growth mindset because of this. But because we were doing this in this area, it was really creating a fixed mindset. And so I think that's made me a better coach today. Yeah. Because I've learned that, and I screwed up on her.
Yeah, sorry, kiddo. It's like, that's what we're guaranteed to do as parents is, because we don't know better. And I think of Maya Angelou's quote often about, when you know better, do better, and do your best until you know better. When you know better, do better. And I think that's again, the continual invitation is, how do I do my best and give my best to those I seek to serve and support today, knowing that I'm likely going to learn something at some point that makes me reflect back and say, oh gosh, that was terrible, and can I have grace with myself in those moments? And instead of apologizing for what I didn't know, be able to say, now I know better and I'm going to do better, and also, right. Sorry if I screwed you up, and I'll pay for your therapy bills,
I love that quote. When you know better, do better.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, one more thing that I'd like to hear you talk about is active communication.
Mm. I think it's easy, Jeff, when you hear active communication to think about what you say. And for me, active communication begins with how we listen and what we don't say. And after we listen, being intentional about how I want to add value here, to be conscious of the fact that my words have power, to be intentional with what I choose to say and what I leave unspoken. And so active communication for me really means taking an active role in the way that we communicate and connect with others. Not simply speaking, but bringing that intention to how am I listening? How am I showing up in spaces in relationship to other people? How am I using my voice when I do choose to speak? What am I saying inside my own head? And being participatory intentionally in all of those spaces. For me, that's what I think of when you say active communication.
Thank you. No, this is extremely valuable. I appreciate all this that you shared with us. I'll make sure in all the show notes and stuff, I'll put your links and whatnot. But do you want to share the best place people can get hold of you?
Sure. You can go to betsybutterick.com, and last name is Butterick. Sometimes at Starbucks specifically, people will spell my name Besty, Besty. Very flattering. I promise I am not the best. So Betsy, Betsy, Butterick.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Betsy Butterick and on Instagram at Betsy underscore the coach's coach. And if you'd like to reach out via email, it's simply Betsy at betsybutterick.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for doing this with me today. There's so much value in here, and I can't wait to share it.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for what you do in service for others. I love that you're in this space and that you're helping to support folks who are looking to make a shift in their mindset so that their lives can be different than they are today. It's vastly important work, and I'm grateful that you're doing it. So thank you.
Thank you.